Good morning again, and I would like to send greetings from Roy Hunt. And as always, he's developed another great course, New Urbanism in Alachua County, with an all-star lineup. And this morning we have Jay Reeves, historic preservation architect, and I'm going to let him introduce himself so I don't miss anything. Thank you, Jay, for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Roy Hunt had sent me a message saying, we're going to introduce me Blair Reeves style. Blair Reeves was my professor in architecture school. Also, he was a mentor to Roy Hunt. He was around forever. He was kind of the one that started the preservation program at UF, but also one of the grandfathers of the preservation programs nationwide. And his way of firing us students up in the morning when we had a jury, he'd say, get up and justify your existence, which, yeah, that'll get you going. Anyway, I am a student of the University of Florida, both bachelor and graduate school. And in graduate school, I specialized in historic preservation. And have been in the practice about 32 years now. And I guess about 28 years ago, moved back to or 30 years ago now, moved back to Gainesville after living in Jacksonville, which is really my home. And decided to take up an opportunity to work in Gainesville because it was a great place. I lived around the University of Florida, as most people do at the time. Rarely ventured off campus except into downtown a few times, but had no idea of the wealth of architecture, the beautiful historic neighborhoods that existed in this town. And all that I found out later, coming down for art festivals and that type of thing. And I found myself coming down more and more often. And then many years later, the opportunity presented itself back in the mid 80s, or late 80s, to maybe it might have been around 1990, to work with my old professors, Susan Tate and Herschel Shepard, on the Matheson Center. We were renovating that as the History Museum. And that's kind of where it all started. And in conjunction with that, I ended up moving back to Gainesville. And with the intention of opening my office, I just got my license. Matheson Center was my first project. I have lived in the duck pond ever since, downtown. My practice and my focus was not only historic preservation, but redevelopment. And I did a lot of that in downtown Jacksonville and worked on that for years and did huge projects, Riverwalk, projects, many great projects that never got built because of politics. That's the way it happens. I've learned with big cities and big projects, it turns out whoever's in office gets what they want. And if you have a changeover, then everything goes in the trash can. And that is the way it works. But anyway, since then, my practice has been mainly based downtown. I have done probably several hundred restorations in the Duck Pond area, downtown area, Pleasant Street, Southeast, all the different neighborhoods down there. And done a lot of redevelopment projects right in the downtown area too. I have always been a fan of new urbanism. I was going through school at the time in the 80s when it was just coming out, mid 80s. And we ironically had a guest speaker at UF who spoke to us architects in the atrium of the old building. And that was Andreas Twani. He was a young, spunky guy who had just done Seaside, but he hadn't done anything else. So nobody really knew who he was. He spoke to the things architects were excited about, the beginnings of the new urbanist trend. And however, the planners and the faculty hated him and walked out of the lecture, basically. So because it went against everything they were teaching, because planning was lagging way behind. So was architecture to a great extent too. I was still being taught the Bauhaus stuff at that time and not really much in the way of urban design or development. And I had always had a fascination with historic districts and old towns. I grew up in an old town in Texas, and that had kind of a lot to do with my inclinations of appreciating modern design, but also respecting the historic architecture. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from. And since then, I've worked outside of Gainesville too, and just mainly nice restoration projects, quite a few in Jacksonville on the coast, St. Augustine, places like that. So that has kind of been my fun projects, which I specialize in. Still do a lot of new work and all kinds of projects. And you never know, I used to design airports. So all kinds of things. But today, and the reason I'm here in front of you is Roy tapped me to talk about old urbanism. And what I've put up there for you today is a definition for new urbanism, and it's a pretty good one. And it kind of gives you the general, just a summary of what exactly it is. There's many of them, towns at this point built across the country. In Gainesville, there's probably about 7 or 8 different developments that could be called new urbanists. There's projects within Gainesville that are called new urbanists. I was actually looking at a 2005 book before this, putting this talk together, and found one of my projects in it. And then that was a surprise to me, but yeah, those are the principles I pretty much live by. You pull the best from traditional development, traditional architecture, traditional cities and towns, and then you pull it back forward and reuse it. And use it as a redevelopment tool has been my approach more than anything else. So anyway, let's show you some stuff that comes under the heading of old urbanism. And this is out of a new urbanist book, which there are many things like this in many publications. And this is what all the architects that practice new urbanism were going back to, is the ancient towns. That's probably in Europe from the looks of it, because it's not a grid the way the US typically is. But the layout would be civic buildings in the middle. You'd have churches, you'd have all your government complexes, you have theaters, you would have retail, shopping, everything right there in the middle. From there, the neighborhoods span out. And this is a really good just example. It's probably a very, very old city, but that is where new urbanists were going back to get their ideas. And that's the roots of new urbanism. Okay, let's see if we can get this to change. It wasn't just the urban planning and the layouts of the towns. They were also literally going back to the architecture and the scale, everything at a pedestrian scale, everything that had the similar materials of the past, and also the architecture, and quite literally almost reproductions of historic buildings and historic houses. A lot of times they'd get more creative, but like Seaside is a little more creative take on cracker housing and that coastal housing you would have seen in the 1920s along the coast. But in other towns and other books, they're doing it literally. A lot of that stuff going on in Virginia, for example. You all know Hale Village, Tioga, and you see the traditional references to the architecture. The planning is also there when you look at it. They're laid out very much the way they were. You typically had in new urbanist developments, you have central radiating plans out, or you had plans that followed the natural terrain, because the natural terrain is the way old cities and old towns developed. Or if you're in the middle of nothing, you would end up with like Gainesville, a grid. And that is kind of how the way Gainesville started out. And that from there, I'm using Gainesville as an example to talk about the old urbanism. And that's just the title sheet. But that shows you Gainesville, the layout of the town. And in this, it's a good bird's eye, so you can kind of get an appreciation. You see the old historic core, and I don't have a pointer, I think, to it. Oh, okay. Yeah. me get in front of the mic so you can hear me. This shows you the downtown area right in here, the old federal building, the library, University Avenue through here. This is transitioning into the Duck Pond area. So that is looking south. You're looking at Depot Park area and all that back into there, and beyond Paynes Prairie, full of water. So this gives you a good view that not many of us actually get to see unless we go up in an airplane or a helicopter. Turning around slightly, you're looking to the southwest. You can kind of see the University of Florida starting to come into view. And Gainesville was built on the high ground around here. So the downtown was set on some of the highest ground because they knew they had a lake out there. You know, about the time it was, or a little bit after, but about that same time, the settlers that came to Gainesville were looking for high, dry ground. That's the whole reason they moved here. And this is looking back to the west, and you can see University Avenue, and you can see downtown is spreading to the campus, and campus is spreading back. And that is something we were talking about and planning for it. When I was a student in architecture school, we were talking about that was going to happen in the future. And, you know, what could we do to make things facilitate that? And since I've been practicing, I've been involved in a lot of that. And it is now, the two are growing together, which is great because there used to be kind of a wasteland between them. And the connection wasn't there and for years. And now it is finally growing together. But this does give you a good view. You start to see the historic neighborhood off to that side. One of the things I want to bring to your attention, one of the reasons Gainesville's downtown has been so successful, one of the reasons I was attracted to come back here is because the historic town still had all of its historic neighborhoods surrounding it. That is one of the rare things you need to bring a town back. I came from Jacksonville, where you had the core city. All the downtown neighborhoods were torn down, or like Springfield, caged in by the interstate. And there really wasn't any good way to get people to live in the downtown areas again. What saved all these historic neighborhoods would be the University of Florida. Housing after the war, we had a severe housing shortage. All these great big old houses, mine included, got chopped up into apartments for GIs, and the town was overrun with people moving back to Gainesville. And that's what saved these buildings. Now, many years later, when I first came back in the 90s and in the 80s, these buildings, these old, beautiful old homes were all derelict, falling apart. You couldn't get loans in these neighborhoods, but they were still there. And as the restoration movement came in, the urban pioneers, like I like to call people and include myself in that bunch that came in and restored all these old homes and helped to bring the neighborhoods back, which allowed downtown to come back. Downtown never really left, but I'll talk a little bit later about it. It nearly got wiped out by the shopping centers, and then the Gainesville Mall nearly destroyed downtown. Not to mention all the parking lots, because they tore a good part of the downtown down just to introduce parking lots for buildings and stores that were no longer there. So the irony is, putting downtown back together was because we had lots available because they tore so much of it down, but not as much as other cities. So we were lucky in that regard. That just gives you a view, and you can see the downtown core right here, but up to the top of the picture, you see the Gainesville Shopping Center. That was one of the big ones that came in the 50s. But you see the neighborhood. You see the southeast, you see the northeast, you see Pleasant Street. The housing stock and the people that live there, generations of families, was all still there. So that is one of the key things about new urbanism. You put the housing back into the equation, then you have the ability to attract stores, shops, restaurants, in Gainesville's case, bars, but that was part of the evolution too. And it's all very necessary ingredients, even when you're laying out a new town. And that's what the new urbanists did. They tackled the residential, they tackled the connection between the two, and designed the towns so that they had a center. In the example of Gainesville, built designed and built in the 1850s. It was all pretty much, I was going to say, small scale stuff. The interesting thing about the town of Gainesville is, and one of the problems we run into right now with all of our big development projects coming in, we have tiny lots. The blocks are small, 200 by 200 for the most part, slightly bigger around the perimeter, but the town was not designed for the projects, because places like Jacksonville had 300 by 600 foot lots, and on and on and on, and even bigger cities had bigger lots. And that is the problem we're running into, and that's why you're seeing a lot of skinny, tiny little skyscrapers, because we were a horse and buggy town, and we were laid out like that. Nobody ever envisioned what it would become today. This shows you the original city limits of Gainesville. You had the courthouse square, which was the center of any American town built during that period, late 19th century. You had Sweetwater Creek. My front yard, which is Northeast Fifth Avenue, was the northern boundary. You only went over a little ways over here, 2 blocks past the square west, because there was nothing west. And University Avenue didn't even really continue. And that's because the University of Florida didn't come till much later. And you had very little actually on the southeast as well. And this is back in the days when you had a grand old mansion sitting where the Hippodrome was at the end of First Street, which was East Main. The main divider in Gainesville was West Main, which is the traditional Main Street nowadays, but that was where the railroad came through. So you had a West Main, which was commercial, hotels, warehouses, train stations, all that kind of stuff. You had East Main, which was churches, the biggest houses, the mansions, the community. That's what East Main was all about. And then later came the Hippodrome building, which was the federal courthouse and post office. So that's how all that kind of happened the way it did. And that's why you still have 2 paralleling streets like that through downtown. And that was drawn out, platted in 1854, before the Civil War. Yes. Mm-hmm. It either has to do with the original section lines, they were trying to fit it to be precise on that, or it has to do with Sweetwater Branch trying to work it so the lots fit in. And I don't know the answer to that, but I would guess it would have been either one of those things. The section lines back in the early days were really what defined it, because prior to the 1850s and James Bailey, this all was part of his plantation. And before that, before he came, it was basically cattle land owned by Cubans. So this was, owned by Cuba. That's where the deeds were for all this property. And it was huge. Hogs too, hogs and cattle. Yeah. So our claim to fame. Back when the town was built, the courthouse square was everything, as with any good Southern town. This was our old brick courthouse. It was the second one that was built in 1884. And it lasted until I believe it was about 1960, when the current county administration building was built around it pretty much. And they took it down, which was a crime. And yeah, that one was a curved mansard. And they later put a more steeper Victorian roof on it, mainly because that one failed. But anyway, and the irony is the building has such a presence, and you think it is such a grand, large building. I have the plans to that building from the 30s when they were going to do an addition to it. The rooms were small. The building was small. Most of the square was still empty. So it was very deceiving. When you see people in front of it, you realize it was this grand feeling building, but it wasn't very big. And that probably had a lot to do with its demise, to be honest. This just shows you the really early days when we didn't have cars everywhere. We didn't worry about parking. Downtown Gainesville with the post office, courthouse, the federal courthouse in the back. Bikes in the early days, wagons, horses. And this is actually a little bit later because you see the brick streets. Originally, and you look at the earliest pictures of Gainesville, dirt streets everywhere. At this time, the neighborhood still would have had dirt streets. So that's kind of how it was, but it was progressive. They had granite curbs. So there's that. This is later. This is showing West Main Street, intersection of University and West Main, our current Main Street. You see the railroad coming right down the middle of the street. Gainesville was founded as a railroad town. That's the whole reason the county was moved to Gainesville, because it started out up near Alachua. But when they heard the railroad was coming, it was all done. Basically, a whole crew came from the Carolinas, built the town. And that's a whole nother long story, but a fascinating one. The downtown area traditionally had your schools, you had your courthouses, your public buildings, your churches, but all of these are gone, by the way. But they were everywhere downtown, and beautiful old buildings, grand buildings. There's a lot of survivors. This is the Harry's building downtown, and something is wrong. It looks almost like it's backwards. No, that's it. It's just, yeah, it's the angle I'm looking at it. But that is the building that started out as the Baird Opera House. That was the theater. It also started out in the early days, it was a two-story building. And then along the ground floor, that's where your saloons were back in the kind of wild days. Actually, not so wild when you think about what goes on downtown at night. Tradition, I guess. Our theaters, we had the Florida Theater. This is the Brown House, which was along the railroad route there. The reason I show you this is because not only the fun cars, but buildings back then were very pedestrian friendly. You had great plate glass windows for the ground floor, so everybody could see what was in the display windows. They could see all the way into the store. That got them light. But also you had balconies and you had canopies over almost all the old stores to keep people out of the rain and to keep the sun off the buildings. And this was true of all buildings. There were a number of them that had these two-story verandas on them. Unfortunately, we've lost most of that. But that building currently is across from the top downtown, right near the intersection of University and Main Street. And it's a county building right now, so you wouldn't recognize it. These are just showing you examples of some of our other downtown streets. These are two different sides of the courthouse square, which all that still exists. We have three sides of the courthouse square intact, which is hard to believe as old as those buildings are. But they looked a lot different when they had their canopies and power lines everywhere. This is an example of a market that was downtown. This is where you went for food. Everybody from the neighborhoods would go to market downtown, and this is where you bought everything. And in most cases, all this was within walking distance to the houses, or they rode their horse. And a lot of the grocery stores and things would be up First Street. Later, they were up Main Street before you got to 8th Avenue. Firestone used to be a grocery store. The building next to the Truist Bank used to be a grocery store as well. You had grocery stores scattered all around the downtown, and little markets, jewelry stores, bookstores. And these storefronts where you see the cast iron elements and the glass, cast iron elements are still there. Glass, not so much. But this is how the storefronts used to look. And we always hope that someday somebody will restore those wonderful, wonderful storefronts. But there's a lot of them down there still intact. And that just shows you just the proprietors. As we progressed in time, the car came in. And downtown, like every place else, had to adapt to the automobile. You notice we still had on-street parking on University Avenue, though, even though it was 4 lanes. And that was encouraging. Originally, it started out with cars being diagonal parking on both sides, which meant there was still parking. But the problem is, this being a DOT right away, once DOT really got into the game, parking went away and it was just became more of a highway, and it's functioned like that ever since. This is the federal courthouse post office. This was one of our grandest buildings, still to this day is. I'd say it's some of the grandest and best historic architecture in the city. It's a kind of an icon for Gainesville, and you see it on all kinds of things. And we are so lucky to have that building, even though times in its past, that wasn't guaranteed. And having a theater in that building is a perfect use. It's an iconic building, and it's an iconic building for downtown. That's part of new urbanism is you really make icons out of the architecture of the buildings in the core, the buildings that are most significant, generally City Hall, that type of thing, church towers, that kind of thing, much the way things used to happen. And they've revived that. Obviously, the buildings don't tend to be as grand as they used to be in history because those were expensive buildings. For today, they would be. And but we're very, very fortunate to still have that building. And there was a time back in the 70s and 80s where that building sat all by itself, everything on both sides of the street leading from University Avenue. Most of that had been torn down, and you had parking lots everywhere. Looked very, very different from what it looks today. So that just, what I'm showing you is Gainesville still has all of its historic urbanist roots. We lost a lot, but in the last 30 years, a lot of it has come back. It's beginning to feel more like it used to in the old days. And that's what the new urbanists are trying to bring back with new towns. And it's a lot more difficult with an existing town, because look at any existing city, what you've got to work with. A lot of glass boxes and a lot of high-rise buildings and things like that. You don't have the options you do with a smaller town. The life is there again. You've got the streets that are walkable, pedestrian scale. You've got everything you would have had back in the olden day. Even canopies have come back. You know, downtown is a pleasant place to be. It's a place that attracts people. That's how it was meant to be. It was meant to be the gathering place and the place you go for all your necessities. And nowadays, it's more about entertainment. It's more about going out and enjoying, going to art shows and things like that. But it still relishes in having those same type of events happen. And there is beginning to get to be some shopping and things coming in, which is kind of the next stage. Eventually, we'll have little urban grocery stores and things like that once the densities get there. And that's all a factor of more housing getting plugged into downtown, which has been happening. That's been another push over the years. Putting the band shell back in the plaza, that was a big effort that attracts people to downtown. And living down there, there's things going on every weekend. You hear the music from my house, and I think it's great. And people are just parading back down to the plaza every weekend. And that's the way it should be. This I show you because here is some of the redevelopment we've had in downtown. The Hippodrome is right off the picture over there. You can see the shadow. These were all empty lots, probably 15 years ago, parking lots. That is Union Street Station, which is a new urbanist type mixed use building. You have retail on the bottom. You have your iconic Starbucks. Yeah, which everybody, the church of today, basically. And then you have retail on the second floor. The top two floors are condos. They're very nice living quarters for people that want to live downtown. And it coexists with everything that's there quite nicely. The next building you can just see the edge of is the Hampton Inn. That's another newcomer that's come in recently, because the bed and breakfast helped bring downtown back, but they soon got overwhelmed and couldn't handle the load and the demand for people that wanted to stay downtown. Therefore, we had to have the hotels. There's other projects. This is a building, the Commerce building that's downtown. that replaced a former Chamber of Commerce building and mainly a lot of parking lots because it was a tiny little building. And the reason I show you is this is one that I did. And the intent here was to come up with a building that fit the historic look of downtown. Part of it actually was in the historic district and was sympathetic to the scale of downtown, the detail level. And this is one I take a little pride in the fact that I think it was pretty successful. And the best compliment I ever got was at the bed and breakfast. Some guy stayed there right after it was finished. And he said, that's the best restoration I've ever seen. To me, that was a compliment because I didn't want it. I wanted it to look like it had always been there and didn't just land in 2000, but it did. But that was a conscious effort. And that wasn't all of it. There's a Regents Park, which is row houses behind it. So it was a big redevelopment project to get people living downtown. All where parking lots used to be. Hampton Inn. This is the newest addition to downtown, which is the Hyatt. And this is a controversial one. It faces the Hippodrome. It's on a very significant site, and it has not been well received at all. And many of us in my field are very, very, very disappointed in it. This begs to the need. We need a historic district which has design guidelines. So buildings should fit downtown's character and where the goal is for downtown to go. But also like the building I did, and sometimes you look to the past for inspiration. And that building does none of that. And I was asked by some of the big developers in town to see what I could do to stop that building. Immediately did some research and found out that is their new corporate architecture for whether it's a Hyatt on a highway or a Hyatt at the airport or whatever. And as soon as I realized that, there's no stopping it. And there really wasn't. The only way it would have stopped is they wouldn't have come and the developers wouldn't give up. And the developers had every right to build that because there's no protection for anything in downtown. So the future is we're hoping to get production downtown, but that is a big disappointment for many of us. Yes, it brings people in, but it just doesn't fit anything down there much. And at night, it looks even worse with all the bright red neon lights on it that flash, and you can see it on the Hippodrome building itself, which is kind of wrong in a lot of ways. This was behind the Commerce building, showing the introduction of row houses, and they were modeled after row houses in Washington, D.C. as a transitional type housing between the more intense brick urban buildings and the Duck Pond neighborhood. Used to be part of the Duck Pond neighborhood and was torn down when they built the City Hall complex. Everything that was there, and those were City Hall parking lots that didn't get much use. So that just shows you what can be done through redevelopment. And everything we're trying to do through redevelopment, we're trying to do it in a new urbanist way. Except it's an old town, so I guess you could call it old urbanism as well. Looking into the Duck Pond area, you all probably know Thomas Center. That's in the southeast. Great architecture that has been brought back. These are wonderful places. And what I see is a lot of people that stay at these places end up moving here. It's kind of ironic. They love the town, they love the character, and these neighborhoods are vibrant. Years ago, they were ghost towns. Years ago, this looked like the Addams Family house, and it was a hippie flop house when I was in school. And that was my favorite house in Gainesville. And but fortunately, B&B's gave them a vehicle to bring them back. And I've been fortunate to work on every one of them. And it's been a pleasure. We have other grand houses. Like you see, there's usually one of these in just about every old Southern town. It's a grand house, but it was a very common house. And you see that. These that are, you know, early 20th century, but still very ornate, look to the past. But this is what attracts people to these older neighborhoods downtown. Number one, the vicinity. I mean, I live on Fifth Avenue, so I can walk to everything downtown in like 3 or 4 minutes. don't even think about driving because parking's too much of a pain. But love the fact that I can walk everywhere and take the dogs downtown. It's convenient. That's very much the way things used to function. That's exactly how new urbanists are trying to get new towns to function, is not depending so much on the car for everything. Yes, we have cars. Most of us don't have garages or driveways, so they end up on the street. That's just fine, not a problem. It works out very well. That's in the south, no, Pleasant Street district. That just shows you these gems that are buried in there people don't even really know about. And this right here sums a lot of it up, but it's just a picture of old Gainesville. But the main things are giving you Gainesville as an example, because new urbanists, the things they want to try to do is look towards historic materials, forms, shapes, detail level, character, create character where character doesn't exist. And that's exactly what we have in our downtowns and the existing downtowns. And to tell you a little bit about downtown Gainesville, I've had many architects look at it back in the 1990s when, late 1990s, when I think it was 98. Andreas Dwani and his gang were in town doing Brighton out off of Tower Road and Archer Road. That development, they asked me to participate and help them, and I did. And one of the things I ended up doing was give them a tour of the Duck Pond area. And so we're walking everybody through there. Andreas, of course, knew all this because the night before in his Cannes lecture that he gives all over the world, one of the sections he shows is neighborhood quality. He showed the intersection of Northeast 3rd and Northeast 4th Avenue. One block behind me, which we have 4 grand Victorians with the picket fences all facing each other. He calls this one of the best intersections in the world. And here he is. He shows it all over the world, right in the middle of the duck pond. So they looked to this. He told me they looked at the duck pond when they were doing Seaside. They looked, of course, up north at a lot of places, but they also they love the old downtown historic neighborhoods that are still intact here. And so that's where you get the creating the new out of the old. And that's where old urbanism is not a term as far as I know, but it probably should be, because it totally has everything to do with new urbanism. And also, I will tell you, another good friend of mine, Luis Diaz, who him and his father did Tioga and laid all that out. I've had them at my house. Luis is a neighbor, lives in the neighborhood. And we would go around the neighborhood and just check distances, check all kinds of things. So they were originally trying to model what they were doing in Tioga after the character of place, the physical layout of the duck pond somewhat, and there are elements there. I will also tell you, a number of years back, there were another building team that I wasn't involved with that was looking and claiming they were doing a development that had a duck pond and was modeled after old Gainesville. That would be the developers of Butler Plaza's expansion. The big boxes, which I find extremely ironic. I have yet to see any ducks. I've seen lots of retention ponds. That's about it. But that just goes to show you, some developers are trying to catchphrase and get on the bandwagon, but they don't get it. It has everything to do with walkable areas, neighborhoods, towns. Yes, you accommodate the cars, but you accommodate them behind the buildings. You give parking lots where they need to be, or you do what we're doing in downtown, garages where they have to be, because that's really the only way to do it in a lot of cases. But you need the neighborhoods to have a downtown. Otherwise, you're building a stage set. And that's something to remember. And that was something Gainesville was so lucky to have. All the neighborhoods there to be redeveloped, reoccupied, renovated, brought back, and today they're pretty exciting places to be downtown. And downtown itself is a pretty exciting place to be. So that just kind of shows you the evolution, how downtown Gainesville and other historic towns are the models for new urbanists. New urbanists have been studying them for years, since the 80s. And the same thing is true of Europe, especially downtowns in Europe, because they are fascinating places. And this is what inspires architects, planners, new urbanists, and we try to do what we can to enhance what was there, restore what was there, bring it all back, complement it, and make it lively again. And Gainesville's been very successful at that, and I'm proud to have been a part of that. And that'll probably lead you into some of your future lectures. You'll start to begin to see some of that. And like I said, that this is what I was tasked with. Old urbanism. Old urbanism, and I looked to old Gainesville to demonstrate it because it's one of the best places I know. Yes.
Hold on, let's get the mic. Thank you. In a couple weeks, you'll be talking to us more about Tioga.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about something dirty,
Okay.
money.
Money. Yes.
The friends of mine, few that they are, who have moved to the duck pond,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like a description of buying a boat, a hole in the water into which you pour money. And that seemed to be a number of people's experience, that you were struck with an attractive building in an attractive location with all of the positive things that you bring out. And then you start working your way into the walls and into the plumbing and into everything else. And pretty soon it's sort of like you could have built a new house for 1/3 of the price that looked almost exactly the same. But so you might want to comment.
Sure. Be happy to. The one project I showed you that I did Regents Park, the row houses, that was a while back in that slide behind the Commerce Building downtown. And another project that downtown was Union Street Station, the condos up above the retail right downtown by the Hippodrome. These were aimed at people that want to live downtown, but don't want the costs, the work that old historic houses take. And in regards to what you're talking about, that is very true of historic buildings. I'm very glad I bought mine when I was 30 years ago, or more, but anyway, because I still had the energy and you could still do things cheaply back then. Nowadays, everything is super expensive to do. True of new houses too, which anybody that knows anything about home ownership knows that houses have to be continually redone, 20 to 30 years, depending on what you're talking about. Any house has to be redone. So you always have that. Historic houses, if you're bringing it back from a dilapidated state, which we were back in the 90s, the 80s, through the 2000s, major expensive projects, but they were investments. Being in a historic district, being in an area where most of them now have been restored at least once and then renovated again, people nowadays, they move into the neighborhood with that in mind. We're getting a much wealthier person moving in. The do-it-yourselfers, the urban pioneers, they're gone because they can't afford to live there anymore. There are more in Pleasant Street, Fifth Avenue, sometimes Southeast, although the Southeast is getting to be an expensive and desirable area to live in. And these neighborhoods, as they all get restored, the buildings, they get more valuable all the time. And during the pandemic, I've never seen anything like it. We had pickup trucks everywhere, loads of deliveries that couldn't even go down our streets, and contractors working on every building on the block. And that is still going on right now. And it's great, but what it means is the first generation of people that restored them the first time, a lot of them are moving out. And they're moving to places like Regents Park. My neighbors across the street are doing that because they're 60s, 70s, and they're like, we don't want to renovate it again. They've already renovated it. It's time to simplify. The problem about owning a historic house, you can update them, modernize them, but they're still like owning a classic sailboat. They are a lot of work, but they will last. Many of these houses are 100 years plus. I'm working on now that was built before the Civil War. That is a grand house that is going to cost way more than it is worth to restore. But the answer is we're in our 40s. We're going to live there the rest of our lives. By that time, they will make money on it, just like Savannah did. If you think about Savannah, when it started off being restored, it was the pioneers that went in first that were taking the battles on. Then people restored, and the next thing you know, they're selling as $1-million houses. Different class of people. You can say it's gentrification, but it's really not because people are not being displaced or kicked out. It's the market has changed. And people want to live in the downtown areas. And this is nationwide. And it is the trend with communities that are nice communities to be in, which not every community is. Downtown, I'm talking about.
Until 5 years ago, I lived in Franklin, Tennessee, and part of it is a National Historic Preservation District. And there is my question. They had specific rules to follow in terms of what could be restored and how it could be restored. And I'd like you to comment on that in
Sure.
regards to our situation, because of course it isn't all a National Historic Preservation District, but I'm concerned that people move in, and there may be examples that you know of people who take a house that's beautiful and they
Mhm.
should restore it and they should do it in the right way, but they don't. So I'm wondering what kind of rules and guidelines are possible or are existing.
That is a very good question, and I'm actually the right person to be talking about. My first experience moving back to Gainesville in 1990 was getting turned down by the historic board 4 times in a row on a new project across from one of these big old houses. And there were a number of reasons behind that, but one of the biggest reasons at that time, there were no guidelines, and the people you had on the board were more like the busybodies, the realtors and people that didn't really know what they were evaluating. You didn't have architects, you didn't have other people. Most of the districts, the Northeast, Southeast, Pleasant Street, hopefully Fifth Ave before it's completely lost. All those are National Register historic districts. And the Northeast has doubled in size over the last 30 years to the north. It used to stop around 8th Avenue, and then it jumped, and it's worked. The thing is, we have guidelines. The board doesn't hear everything. Staff person usually signs off on most projects. What we look for is maintaining the character of the house. And we don't tell you what to do with the inside of the house. We do tell you you can't put vinyl windows in a house with wood windows. You have to replace with wood windows. And we encourage you to restore the wood windows because that is actually a cheaper solution a lot of times. The colors we don't regulate, but we're pretty benign as a board. And I can tell you this because I am the chairman of the board. I've been on the board for many, many years, almost 30, to make sure what happened to me never happens again, where you get a board that's overzealous and treats everything like it's Williamsburg, because that's absurd. This is Gainesville, Florida. Yeah, we got a few great buildings. We got a lot of good buildings. We got some significant buildings. We got a lot of average Joe buildings, and you have to be respectful of that. People own those buildings, and we try to educate them about what they're buying into. But there are no real strict rules. We have very few disapprovals. 97 to 98% of what we see every year gets approved. sometimes with just minor changes. Now, I have met with some new clients the last few days on a nice craftsman house, 1920s style. It's a pretty good size, across from Jane Meyer, you'll know. And 2,400 square foot swimming pool and a remote garage out back. They are coming in and they want to do a 4,000 square foot addition to it. They want to put a 3-car garage facing out onto the street. They want to tear all the original wood floors out. They want to tear all the windows out. These are the ones we are here to protect against. Now they are hiring me as their architect, and I have since educated them, you can get everything you want without doing that to that house, because you will be destroying the historic quality, integrity of it. And then, just to tell you, this is nothing new. This has been happening in Winter Park, Orlando, Miami, South Florida, all over the place. It's usually somebody that's overzealous and has more money than, yeah, they just want everything to look brand new, which if that's the case, they're really probably buying in the wrong neighborhood.
Yeah, Jay.
Yeah.
Jay, so question. First off, I want to compliment you and thank you and Roy and Lori and others, the Barrows, for your forethought and foresight on preserving these valuable properties and icons in our town. My question is your general thoughts about the downtown strategic plan as it's proposed, and also if you had a wand, what would you put in the power district?
Well, the latest strategic plan, I am not that knowledgeable about. And I've seen so many plans come and go over the years that I try not to get that involved in it. And I kind of got out of being on the downtown boards a while back, but it had more to do with the city manager I didn't get along with. And because I thought his ideas were wrong and his heart wasn't in the right place. And, but I am getting more involved in downtown right now. I'm involved with the University of Florida, and I'm involved with students that are studying the downtown, looking to see how to take it to the next level, looking to see how to get those buildings some protection, which right now are very vulnerable and exposed to developers that want to build high-rise student apartments. And that is our biggest threat right now. And we have no way to stop them. So that is what it is. It's not to prevent developers from doing projects. We need developers to build. We need people to renovate houses. We need all kinds of things. But there is a right way and there's a wrong way. And you can educate people without just telling them no. And that's what I've been doing with these new clients I was talking about. They're on board now. We're doing a much smaller addition. We're doing all the right things and they're happy. But you have to educate them first and show them what's the right thing to do. And part of what I told them the right thing to do is to make sure they don't screw up the value of the house. The house will keep appreciating as long as you save the best aspects of the original house and as long as what you do is compatible to it. Because I can't tell you, my house back in 1990, I paid $1 for it. It was about to be burnt to the ground by the fire department. I paid $1, moved it across the park, and restored it for $100,000. It's a 3,000 square foot massive house. And the thing is, I am still there today. I don't even know what it's worth now. However, after being there for 30 years, yes, I'm replacing the AC. Yes, I'm repainting and I've got some rot repair to do. But on the other side of that is I have a house built out of heart pine wood, which is basically as strong as oak. Nothing like what today's materials are. I have a roof that has been on there for 100 years. My wife in the neighborhood has a cafe that we restored too. That roof has been up there 100 years. Don't ask me how I'm dealing with the insurance company on that. But these old houses were well built out of really high quality materials. They don't even compare to what's being built. They last in spite of everything they've been through. And you can bring them back. But yeah, it costs money. And then right now, with everything costing to do anything, it would be cheaper to replace, going back to your question, it would be cheaper to replace a lot of these houses, but it would not be with the same value or quality. And that's what it is. These houses, many of them, the windows will last 200 years in them. Most of them are 120 years already. And today's windows, double insulated glazed, you can throw those away in 30 years because the seals will all pop.
Mhm. Um, Could I just think it's interesting, it seems to me there's two issues here. The people you mentioned with all the money that want to kind of destroy they want to live in the historic downtown, but they want to make
Mhm.
their house unhistoric. If what they want is to live in historic downtown, then they shouldn't mess with the house, right? But there are all those other things that you talk about all the time about walkability and
Right.
I have a friend who lives not downtown, but she can walk to the post office, the library, the grocery store,
Mhm.
and it's pleasant where she lives. It seems to me that there's two things. We want the historic places, but we can also have other places that are not historic but have those other values. And Gainesville should try and retain, we do have some places like that now. And those people that you mentioned, send them to one of these other places where.
Well, that is absolutely true. Not everybody can live downtown. It's very hard to get one of these houses nowadays. They usually sell before they go on the market, and they are really expensive, even with all the work they need. What new urbanists are trying to do is create these areas. Obviously, Tioga, Hill Village Center, Brighton, they're all attempts to get that going. Mill Hopper already had a lot of that going on, but still it's an area that's very laid out for vehicles. You need your vehicles. And I'll be honest, I can walk to the Publix grocery store from my house, but I don't always because the weather is not really that conducive. I certainly walk to Goodyear when my car's being repaired though, out of necessity. But I have the option. And then with us having the depot park downtown, it's just a whole nother range of things for us to do where we don't have to drive somewhere else. And with the entertainment's all built in right there. And it just keeps getting better in my opinion. But this is also true of other historic cities. Athens, Georgia is a really good example. You know of some other places. There's plenty of places up north like that in historic cities. Some of my favorite places are Savannah and Charleston. And I just love how walkable they are. And I used to live in Nantucket, so that kind of tells you where my mentality is. Leave the car in the driveway. So, you know.
Thank you for showing those old pictures because I remember all of them. I remember the train going down
Mm.
West Main Street and all of the buildings around there, but I can't picture the Brown building. And you told me where it is. Please tell me again.
It's right next to the Episcopal Church. Louis Lunch, not Louis Lunch. Philnix used to be in there. Philnix used to be in that building. And it's just this beige box right now. Like I said, the county owns a number of the buildings down there and
So it's on Main Street.
it's on Main Street.
At what avenue?
Hmm?
At what avenue?
First. That'd be Northeast First Street.
Ah, okay.
It's North Main. Yeah.
Thank you.
She's getting the mic for you.
Thank you. I want to shift to, there's a lot of design, pictures, plans, international and domestic. And what I'm really talking about is the revolution of Paris
Mhm.
with this huge urban renewal projects all the way to streets and very dynamic that we even see today in modern Paris.
Right.
And I'm singling in on Place des Vosges. Do you know that?
That name I don't know, but I know Paris.
Okay, that's one of the urban squares down near the Central Railway Station of Les Halles in Paris. But
Gotcha.
I'm kind of interested in kind of thinking about what do you expose yourself of saying, well, this is an international project that's really not very applicable to a local setting, or is it local domination, or is there international pressure to take the best of the world in terms of architecture, like IMP, designs the national entryway to the Louvre.
Mhm.
Fantastically creative design.
Yeah.
He actually built a museum on the University of Indiana campus that was the precursor to the National Gallery.
Yeah.
So they have, and I just wonder, where would you get is most of your work adapting local conditions or state conditions or regional conditions, or international conditions?
All right. Very good question for any architect, actually. I consider myself more of a regionalist. I look at the history. I look at the materials that were used in the areas where I work. I try to be sympathetic and compatible. I am not somebody that's out to design a monument. The people you're talking about in Paris are the same people you're talking about in Washington, D.C., where they have huge budgets. They're trying to do a monument. And that's something that I don't do. If I were doing a lot of museums like on US campus or something like that, the opportunity's there. But generally, I like more urban situations. I like improving what's there. I kind of like everyday architecture. And like I said, I don't necessarily feel everything needs to look historic. I think that's been done a little too much. And like I say, some of the new urbanist towns are a little cutesy or almost like Disney stage sets. Not quite so fond of those. I think they could be more original without copying every little detail and looking like a fake house of a certain period.
Last question? No. Is this on? Hi. Hi, Jen. I was wondering about, I understand that downtown is not historically an historic district,
No, it's not.
which is pretty upsetting.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you see getting there.
That is the reason we are working with the University of Florida right now and doing the proper studies. One of the reasons it never happened, because I tried to make that happen when I was involved in downtown work and historic board at the same time, because I saw the future, what was going to be coming. I knew the big buildings from South Florida were coming. I knew the developers were coming. I mean, we're to a point now where there are very few local developers left, where you got people putting up these buildings from California, Miami, and they're putting up the same buildings everywhere. The architects, engineers are from wherever they're from. They're not doing anything that's regional to Gainesville. And that's one of the things the Hyatt built, one of the reasons the Hyatt building is so repulsive. But ironically, some of the early developers, and I won't mention names in Gainesville, that did a lot of the downtown redevelopment work are very much on board with it now. They weren't 20-something years ago because they thought it would impact their ability to do projects. And they just, a developer doesn't want anybody telling them what to do. It's just more regulation was their approach. Now they've done a 180. The Hyatt had a lot to do with that and other projects that are on the drawing board they know of too. And they're worried about downtown. And so I think the timing is right because they are very powerful politically, and we needed that to happen. But also we needed a changeover in the city with the people that deal with planning and all that. We've had all that. We've got a great historic preservation director right now. That was key because for a number of years, we didn't have anybody. We couldn't do anything as a board. And we can't, as a board, impose it on them. Downtown has to come to us and ask us to do it. And it's true of any historic neighborhood. And right now we got people's like Porter's neighborhood, the poor sections of town, the Afro-American communities that are being overrun by developers buying everything up, getting ready to raise the entire area to do more student housing. They are approaching us. We've got other areas, Fifth Avenue, you see what's happening. The 6-story buildings are marching through that neighborhood right now. And I'm seeing great old historic houses just get bulldozed and they don't even bother pulling permits to do it. And they can and get away with it. So now is the time where districts are important. They are really not a burden on the homeowners. They give the homeowners peace of mind to make huge investments in these properties, knowing the values of these neighborhoods keeps going up. And when they do get ready to cash out, they will do very well. And that is what is happening now. So hopefully that answered your question. Timing is right. We've got people doing the background and the research. And it will not be a district like the Duck Pond. It will be more like University Heights across from campus, where we save the best ones. The new buildings and projects that come in have to be compatible, and the scale can't go crazy. You can't jump 10 stories next to a one-story building. But that is happening right now in places where the districts don't exist. And so it's more about protection at this point. It's encouraging redevelopment. We want that. The neighborhoods need it to stay vibrant. And we want more people living in these areas if possible. And we're trying to do more housing all the time. But it's all driven by the market. And right now, the market is driving student high-rise apartments because that's the trendy thing for students and parents with lots of money. And that's
Jay,
what's-
we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. And on behalf of Roy Hunt and all of us, we thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.